It's important we look at the facts.
Why?
Douglas Ross is sounding pretty scared.
I believe in independence.
And he clapped like a seal.
Hi there, I'm Paul Hutchin, political editor of the Daily Record. Thanks for joining us on another Planet Holyrood. Joining me this week are Planet Holyrood regulars. We've got John Ferguson, who's the political editor of the Sunday Mail, and we've also got Ben Borland, who's the editor of the Scottish Daily Express. So just to kick off, in previous episodes they've been dominated by the long-running scandals over Operation Branch Form and the Nicola Sturgeon WhatsApp row, not to mention the Michael Matheson issue over his data roaming. These things haven't really come up to any great extent this week, but it's still been a hugely important week given that the budget was pushed through by SNP and Green MSPs on Tuesday. And I think it'd be fair to say it was a very difficult budget. It was Humza Yousaf's first budget in the job as First Minister. If you look on the spending side, there was a £196 million affordable housing cut. There was a measly £1.70 rise in the Scottish child payment. And then on the tax side, you've got higher rates for wealthier Scots, and you've also got the controversial council tax freeze, more of which later. So the SNP have attracted flack from the left and the right. Just starting with you, John, Humza Yousaf, when he ran for office, he said that child poverty would be his number one issue. Do you think that his first budget was the moment when his sort of dreams hit or clashed with the reality of budgetary pressures?
Yeah, I think that's true. If you look at this budget, it's kind of really as different as the SNP are to the Conservative government in London. I think they're basically trying to do the same thing here. They're trying to balance a very difficult public spending equation with throwing voters a bit of a bone in the election year. So you see cuts to public services that the Scottish government do directly control, and then this attempt to give voters something in terms of a council tax freeze. But the thing about that council tax freeze is that a lot of the services that help children and families that are living in poverty come through councils, and I think we can, that's why they're so upset with being told that they can't increase the council tax, and they're very worried that, despite the fact Scottish government have set aside some money that to give them to make up that difference, that it's not going to be enough. I don't think anyone would doubt that Humza Yousaf genuinely wants to do something about child poverty, that he's a genuinely left-wing-minded politician. But I suspect he does. He's just coming up against the bitter, hard realities of government and actually having to balance your books.
Sticking with the council tax freeze, John, clearly this has been a tough one for local authorities. COSLA are raging about it. You've got Argyll and Bute Council defying the council tax freeze. It looks like Inverclyde Council might go for a rise as well. It seems like relations have just completely broken down between councils and the Scottish government. Yeah,
and I mean, I think you've got to say this isn't. They're not. I don't think that the councils are playing politics with this necessarily. I mean, it's interesting, for example, Argyll and Bute saying that they are going to go ahead with this 10% rise. The way council funding works, they won't get all of that 10% rise. It will only be a small portion. So it's potentially going to be a negligible amount extra that they will actually be able to have to spend on services. But I think that's probably more an expression of the desperate position that they feel they're in financially. That we can see that there are real life examples up and down the country of councils actually going bust fallen into effective bankruptcy. We've seen with Glasgow City Council how they've effectively had to mortgage off the city's most valuable assets, the Kelvin Grove Art Gallery, their own city chambers. So this isn't a political game. This is, I think that the problem here is that councils really are skint and worried that they're not going to be able to pay their wage bill and deliver the services that they're expected to deliver.
Ben, the added challenge for the Scottish Government with this budget is that it's in an election year. So it's been pushed through a few months before an expected Westminster election, where they'll get the blame for all sorts of things. In purely electoral terms, do you think that the SNP will get more flack for the spending cuts or the tax rises, by which I mean the income tax rises?
I think it depends who you're more likely to vote for. I think the Conservatives will make hay about the tax rises, and they'll feel that their kind of voter base will be most aggrieved at the tax gap between Scotland and the rest of the UK being increased still further this year. It looks as though Jeremy Hunt's going to deliver tax cuts next week. So while John's saying, that it's a difficult balancing act, and the UK government and the Scottish government are facing the same challenge, Jeremy Hunt, it looks like he's going to find, the report suggests that it might be a further cut to national insurance following the cut that he delivered in the autumn statement. So while the economic outlook's the same, the UK government is managing to cut taxes. I mean, they're still very high, but they're managing to cut taxes, whereas the Scottish government is putting them up. So I think if you're a Conservative strategist, you're looking at, let's make the most of this tax gap, the fact that taxes are rising in Scotland and they're going down in the rest of the UK. Although, obviously, if it is national insurance that Mr. Hunt chooses to cut, then we'll get the benefit of that as well, because it'll be a UK-wide cut rather than an income tax rate cut, which wouldn't have any implication in Scotland. I think for Labour, they'll be looking at the service, reductions in public services, the NHS, schools, and arguing from the other side that this budget is actually making Scotland, a worse place to live because public services are being starved of cash. I think,
so
whichever
way. It sounds like they're going to get it from both angles, from Labour and from the Tories. I mean, Ben, is there any silver lining here for the SNP government at all? I mean, could they maybe run on the council tax freeze?
From my point of view, the council tax freeze is the only silver lining. Not if you live in Argyll and Bute, and as you were saying, maybe Inverclyde and other places. But I think a freeze in council tax, which obviously would kick in from April, everyone's going to see the benefit in their pockets and in the pay packets. Well, not in the pay packets, but in the bank statements come the end of the month. So,
just to play devil's advocate with that, given that water is on the same bill and that's rising, the actual bill itself will still go up. Whether or not the average voter looks at the bill and makes a distinction between council tax and water, who knows?
But very true. I guess people are going to have to actually stop and think, if my council tax hadn't been frozen, my bill would have been X. Now, whether the SNP will want to make that point in the election campaign, it's quite a hard one to get your head around, a sort of notional bill of what your council tax would have been. And then obviously, I think that the freeze has been so badly handled, and there's already been so much mud thrown at it that it doesn't feel like a big win for the SNP anymore.
I know, it's slim pickings. John, just to briefly go back to relations with councils. We've had a couple of stories this week that the sort of situation, the relationship is so bad now that you've got Labour councils writing to Michael Gove asking that he just pass on Barnett consequentials directly to councils over the head of the Scottish Government. Because obviously the Scottish Government wants to put the council tax freeze condition on that funding. It seems like a far cry from the so-called Verity House agreement that was signed by Humza and the councils last year, which was promising a new age of cooperation.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like a strange move, doesn't it? It'll be interesting to see how Michael Gove responds to that. I don't think that he's going to be in a position to be able to pass on those consequentials as much as he might have liked to do so if he could. I think it would cause a political uproar if he was to do that. I guess this is the point where things do get a little political, in that if you've got a Labour-controlled council, they're going to be more likely to want to pick a fight with the SNP. But it's an interesting question, is just what people will think of that when they're picking the fight by, effectively bypassing the Scottish Government. I guess that, again, will depend on which side of the constitutional debate that you sit on.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to get better anytime soon. I think that's the bottom line. Just another issue that came up this week, Ben, the latest crackdown on unhealthy food. Clearly, Scotland's got a troubling relationship with alcohol, but I think the same argument could be made, not just for Scots, but people across Europe and their relationship with high salt, high sugary foods and drinks. It looks like the Scottish Government is going to be cracking down on things like meal deals, unlimited refills, buy one, get one free deals. What's your thoughts on this? Does this in any way live up to the scale of the problem?
It's the completely wrong-headed way of tackling the problem. Banning things is the SNP's knee-jerk response to any problem. And again, it's the same approach they've taken with alcohol. It's everyone gets punished rather than targeting the response at those who need it. Why? It's a question of personal choice and personal freedom, and why on earth should someone not be allowed to buy a meal deal? Why on earth should someone not be allowed to buy an extra large drink when they're getting a takeaway? The answer to the obesity crisis, it lies in educating people. And we know what the SNP are like with education. This should be done through the schools. It shouldn't be done by restricting people's economic freedom to buy what they choose. The same goes for alcohol. We've seen the SNP love the minimum unit pricing, but the academic studies don't bear it out. It isn't necessarily working. And the same will be true for this junk food crackdown, which Humza Yousaf has already dropped it once because it was so unpopular, and in the middle of the cost of living crisis, trying to restrict access to bargain foods. But now it's back again. It's coming at this problem from completely the wrong direction and restricting the choice for everyone rather than targeting help at those who need it. It's not surprising, because this is just, this is plan A in the SNP's playbook which unfortunately only has one plan. So I wouldn't be surprised if eventually this is ditched again at some point.
There was a Scottish Government post-cabinet briefing this week where the issue came up, and I have to say, I didn't think that the First Minister's official spokesperson was massively enthusiastic about some of the things in the consultation. And then 24 hours later, the First Minister had an event on poverty, and he was asked about the crackdown. And again, I just felt like he was a little bit cool in it. I don't feel like this is a massive priority for the Scottish Government. Maybe they're looking at past rows and where other policies are unravelled completely. I may be wrong on that, but I don't detect a huge amount of enthusiasm. Where do you stand on this, John? Do you think is it a matter of personal responsibility, or do you think that there's a role for government to intervene and try and essentially enforce healthier eating habits?
I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea for the government to try to influence society to eat better. So, like Ben said, the SNP have tended to be quite interventionist in this type of thing, whether it's banning sectarian singing or banning alcohol below a certain price, or it's the attitude they take is that if you can do something, then you should do it. In this particular instance, I'm not sure that I'm convinced. I have to say, when I first glanced at the headline saying they were going to ban meal deals, I thought maybe this was something to do with them abandoning their free school meal policy in schools, which the Daily Record, of course, had the front page a couple of days ago, suggesting that policy was under threat and potentially wasn't going to get rolled out to primary 6 and 7s as has been promised. I would suggest that if you want to, encourage health eating, then that would be a perfect way to do it. Make sure that kids all get something healthy to eat in school. The other thing, I hold my hands up. I have bought a few meal deals in my day, and I don't think they necessarily have to be unhealthy. My experience in this market is that the various supermarkets offer, you could choose a can of Coke, or you can choose water, you could choose a healthy sandwich or an unhealthy one, and you can choose to have a bag of crisps or some kind of fruit. So I don't actually think that that meal deals represent unacceptably unhealthy meal choices. So I'm not quite sure that I really understand where they're coming from in this one. I think meal deals just bring together what is generally accepted to be a reasonable lunch, and that people can buy it for a little bit cheaper than they otherwise could. So, it left me scratching my head a bit. I think that it's no objection to, in some cases, governments can legislate to try to do things they think will make society better, and sometimes that will infringe on personal freedoms, but you really need to think carefully about what things you do that with.
I know, it just strikes me that even if you think this is a problem, it's not going to be the massive leap forward that everyone thinks it is. It just seems to be window dressing. Surely if you want to encourage healthier lifestyles, you could maybe subsidise free gym memberships or subsidise gym memberships. Then, of course, you'd probably find that the leisure centres have been closed as a result of the council tax freeze.
And even school playing fields, there's stories about kids not being able to use them because they're run by some PFI contractor. There's loads of things I think you could do that would improve health and tackle obesity rather than this.
Indeed. So just moving on, tomorrow is the beginning of the Scottish Tory conference in Aberdeen. I understand the Prime Minister may be in town. There was a row at the last Scottish Tory conference after they agreed to do a huddle, but only for selected outlets. I don't think I can be holier than thou on this. At the Labour conference in Glasgow recently, the Record was the only paper to get access to Keir Starmer. So I'm not going to be too sanctimonious about that sort of thing. But it looks like the Prime Minister is going to be getting access to the Scottish press, which can only be a good thing. Ben, what do you think is the mood of the Scottish Tory troops on the eve of this conference?
I think that they're quite buoyant, certainly compared to the Tories down south. Obviously, the UK party's been in turmoil, it seems, almost constantly for a long time now, and the polls don't look good. But by contrast, I think Douglas Ross and his team in Scotland, and also the Scotland office team, have been doing a good job. If you believe the opinion polls, it's not all doom and gloom in Scotland. Obviously, they're up and down. Some are better than others. But my understanding is that after the general election, that they're quietly confident at Scottish Tory HQ, certainly of hanging on to the 6 seats and maybe even adding a few more.
I agree with that, actually, because I speak to Tory MSPs and they're expecting a very bad result across the UK. They think that Starmer's going to win, that Labour will be the next government. But paradoxically, given that the SNP are in free fall, they think that by the SNP falling at a faster rate than themselves, they could actually pick up 2 or 3 seats in addition to holding on to the ones they've got. So that's not really going to have a massive impact across the UK in terms of the final result. But Ben, you would imagine it'll be enough to allow Douglas Ross to hold on to his job, certainly up until the Holyrood election.
Yeah, absolutely. No. As I say, I think this happens in elections in Scotland, and it's been a trend in the past that tactical voting comes into play. People who don't like the SNP, to put it quite bluntly, and don't want politics to be continued to be dominated by the constitutional debate. They're quite happy as part of the United Kingdom, don't want another referendum. They would like this to be put to bed. Not necessarily dyed-in-the-wool Tories, but they'll vote for the Conservatives as the party that's strongest on the union. I think tactical voting tends to work where in favour of the Tories in certain areas, but not in others. There are Labour voters who would never in a million years vote Conservative. But then, there's some areas where there is some crossover. I think it works the other way. I think in the past, Scottish Conservatives have been prepared to vote for Labour or the Lib Dems to keep the SNP out. Now, what will be interesting is with a change of government on the line and the potential for Keir Starmer getting in, do Scottish Conservatives, are they still prepared to back Labour? That would be an interesting one, I think. If you're a Tory in a seat that the Tories can't win, do you still vote Labour? And potentially then have 5 years thinking, geez, I voted for this mob. So there's a lot still to play for. But no, I think they're quite buoyant, to answer your question.
John, Ben's right, obviously, that if you are strongly in favour of the United Kingdom, that's your number one issue. Clearly, the Conservatives would be your top choice. But as the Scottish Tory Conference begins, what does Douglas Ross and his team actually stand for beyond the union? I mean, can you see any sort of policy platform that could be worked up as an alternative government? Because I can't see anything.
No, I mean, and I don't even feel like the Constitution and independence is such. I think everybody kind of knows that that's off the table for the foreseeable. And I don't think that the Conservative unionist thing is quite so potent in that respect. But I think that the Tories in Westminster are clearly suffering from being a party who have been in government for a very long time, fighting a opposition party that's got a lot of ammunition to fire at them. And I think conversely in Scotland, the Conservative Party are benefiting from a party that's been in opposition against a government that's been in power for an awful long time and there's an awful lot of problems that have built up. I think that if you look overall, probably the most concerning thing really about British politics in general is that from the SNP to the Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, it's quite difficult on quite a lot of things to really see that much difference between them, apart from obviously the SNP's support for independence, especially in the Scottish Parliament. It would be, if there was a new issue to come up tomorrow, it would be quite difficult to predict exactly what position the different parties would take on it, other than that they would want to oppose each other.
Yeah, I mean, I can see what the Scottish Tories are against. I'm just not entirely clear what they're for. Okay, let's wrap this up. Ben, good week, bad week. Let's start with you.
I suppose the big story away from politics, although it has come up at FMQs today, so I guess it is now a political story, is obviously the Emma Caldwell murder conviction. A huge story, and a very long-running case, very tragic. Good week. I'm going to choose Amar Anwar, the lawyer who acts for the Caldwell families there with Margaret Caldwell. He's been instrumental in really making sure that the mistakes in the investigation have been brought into the light and not just buried by police. It's unusual to see a conviction in a cold case like this, a very high-profile cold case, and rather than the crime itself, almost the failures in the investigation are almost as big. And I think that's largely thanks to Amar Anwar and his efforts in making sure it's all brought out. And staying on the subject for a bad week, it's been a bad week for Sir Stephen House, who was name-checked by Mr. Anwar in the statements outside court. Obviously, he was Chief Constable of Strathclyde Police 2007 to 2013, and then Chief Constable of Police Scotland. I think by the time he arrived at Strathclyde, the original mistake of overlooking Packer had already been made, but he clearly didn't do much to pursue the case after he arrived from the Met. But then, most damningly, when the Sunday Mail revealed Packer as the so-called forgotten suspect, it was under him that instead of reopening the case, the police tried to...
Yeah, another disaster
on
Sir Stephen House's watch.
Yes, yeah.
Thanks for that, Ben. John, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I would just say that, the Emma Caldwell case has been is hugely significant, and I think it's worth mentioning the part that Jim Wilson, former Sunday Mail editor, played in this story. This is before my time at the Sunday Mail, so I'm not trying to take any credit, but Jim took an incredibly brave decision in 2015 to put Ian Packer's photograph on the front page and say, this is the forgotten suspect. This is the guy that the police should be looking at. He did that, and in the face of some pretty severe legal advice. It was a real moment of publishing Be Damned and doing something really important in journalism. And I don't think it's too much to say that if he hadn't taken that decision, as much as there's some other media outlets claiming a bit of credit for this story. I think if Jim hadn't done that and hadn't pursued the story week in, week out, then I don't think Ian Packer would have been convicted of this murder.
I think it was pretty extraordinary journalism. I remember reading the Sunday Mail that day. Can't remember how many pages they gave. I mean, obviously Brendan McGinty played a starring role in the story as well. But yeah, just very powerful journalism that's had a positive end result.
Yeah, it made a real difference. In terms of my good week, bad week, I think it's been a good week for Stephen Flynn. This is a story that was kind of started last week and bled into this one a little bit, just in terms of the SNP's attempts to get a vote on an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. I think that Stephen Flynn's kind of, come of age in his role as the SNP's Westminster leader on this. I think he's been really good, and I think he's expressed a case that is very much in line with what a lot of people in the country are feeling at the moment. People are feeling like politics is out of touch with what they think on the subject, and conversely, I think it's been a bad week for the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, who, after this really pretty lamentable decision to dump the SNP's vote in favour of a Labour motion, which completely broke with convention and appeared to have been against the accepted rules. He then, in the face of the furore at this, promised that he would allow the SNP to have an urgent debate. Then at the beginning of this week, he just said, well, no, actually, we're not going to bother doing that. I think you're looking on at this, and whether you're an independence fan or an SNP fan, you have to think that the SNP and Scotland, as a result, given that the vast majority of Scottish MPs are SNP MPs, really has been treated pretty abysmally, and that there's serious questions to be answered, and it's quite concerning, the kind of the lack of interest among the Westminster media and establishment in terms of having those questions answered.
All right, John, thanks for that. I think that pretty much concludes. Let's get back to our day jobs of hunting down truth and justice. That's what we do, is it not?
Something like that.
Of course.
I think, indeed. I hope that everyone enjoyed that episode of Planet Holyrood, and please join us again next week, where I think it'll be Hannah, Roger and Dougie from the Scottish Daily Express. Cheers.
I think it's important we look at the facts.
Why?
Douglas Ross is sounding pretty scared.
I believe in independence. And he clapped like a seal.